Welcome to the Consulting Success Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Zapersky. In this podcast, we'll dive deep into the world of elite consultants, where you'll learn the strategies, tactics, and mindset to grow a highly profitable and successful consulting business. Hey, it's Michael Zapersky, and today I'm very excited to have Harrison Monarth joining us. Harrison, welcome.
Hi, Michael. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You've consulted and coached executives and CEOs at companies like HP, P&G, GM, Deloitte, and PepsiCo. Before we dive into what you're doing today, let's go back and look at how you got to where you are. And so I'm very interested to learn, how did you get into the business of executive presence, which is the title of your recent book? And what were you doing before you got into the world of coaching and consulting?
Sure. So executive presence, let me start there real quick. That is the title of my new book, and it's part of our executive coaching practice. And one of the reasons I got into that is because over the years, since I wrote the first edition of this book, actually, which was 10 years ago, almost exactly to the month, in 2009, we started getting lots of requests. And when I say we are consulting firms, I have 8 coaches on our team. And we started getting lots of requests asking from companies, organizations, asking us to help their leaders with either some behavioral change or helping them develop some new skills and competencies for their roles. And so it became a bit of a specialty. So ever since then, we've been working really with some of the top companies in the world on that. And now we work with clients on other issues that don't necessarily relate to executive presence as an executive coaching firm, but that is a specialty of ours. As far as what I did before that, I started my coaching practice in 1999. And before that, I worked in various sort of leadership positions at a manufacturing company in marketing before. I'm originally from Europe. I'm originally from Germany. And then I left Germany in my early 20s, went to Austria, and then worked for a politician who was also a real estate tycoon in Vienna. And so he was in the Viennese parliament. And so as a young man, he asked me to help him with his speeches and with his presentations. And so it was all intuition. I really didn't have any training in that, but I sort of had a knack for it and helped him become better in the way he showed up in his, like I said, his speeches, his meetings. And so he gave me a lot of credit for his success. And so after that, I was sort of hooked on, helping people communicate more effectively. And that kind of morphed then into my passion for coaching. I studied management and technology, so I don't really have a background, or didn't at the time have a background in coaching, but it was something I was very passionate about. And so, of course, then over the years, you study psychology, aspects of neuroscience that are relevant, theater, really, and then, of course, coaching practice to become good at it. And the success of the clients obviously then tells you whether or not what you're doing makes sense or not.
Right. So I want to go back to that time when you're working with this real estate tycoon and politician in Austria, right? You're helping him, as you mentioned, to really show up in a more effective way that got him better results in terms of what he was looking for. And then kind of recognizing that's something that you should do more of because you enjoyed it and you were good at it. At that time, you could have, with your background, and you said you studied technology as well, what made you decide that you were going to focus really on developing the positioning and focus around, this idea of kind of showing up in the most effective way that you now call in your book executive presence? Like, why not go a different path? Or did you start off by going many different paths and later focus more? Or, because to me, it seems right now you're very focused. So I'm wondering, how did you get to the place where you are today in terms of your service offerings and focus?
I think it had to do with, I've always had a passion for it. I've always admired people that could show up well, people that had an impact and that had influence. And even as a child, I would watch how people communicated, watch how people behaved, their nonverbals, what made them effective and what made other people ineffective in terms of getting a point across, or the way they established connections with people. So that was a passion I think I had early on. I was a very keen observer of people. And so when you see people doing it well, you learn a few things along the way. And when you see people doing it well, you want to emulate that because it's power. It's almost like a superpower. Right. And so I thought, it is so important for people because there are lots of very smart people that are either stuck in middle management or somehow stuck in their careers, or they don't quite get the exposure they deserve because something's missing. It's that ability to project an executive presence, to be not just an effective leader, but a successful leader, somebody who has political savvy, somebody who has a way of engaging with people that draws them to you. And so that is something that has appealed to me ever since I can think. And in fact, I think I was 16 years old. I read a book by Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And I remember even at the time at 16, being super excited about the things that I read and about what is possible if you just communicate and engage with people in a certain way. And so that stuck with me. And that certainly then was one of the contributing factors to me starting this consulting practice.
So let's dive deeper into that. I'm going to ask you to guide us through some of the key steps in building a personal brand that everyone trusts. But I think before we do that, I'd love to hear your perspective on really why is it so important that consultants focus on fostering trust and credibility as part of building their business?
Well, one of the reasons is that there's so many choices out there. And it's whatever profession you choose to engage with, whether it's a dentist or a surgeon or a plumber. I mean, nowadays we have the opportunity to look at, first of all, we have many choices, and then we can now check people out. We can see, how has this person been with other customers and clients? Are they doing good work? Do they have good reviews? Nowadays with Yelp and two movies, Rotten Tomatoes. I mean, I drive my wife crazy we browse through movies and then it doesn't have some seriously high ranking in the tomato section. Then we're not watching it. She's like, no, what do you mean? We make up our own mind. And I'm like, well, but the critics say.
That's very interesting. See, I do something very similar. I use IMDb, and when I'm on Netflix and looking at a movie, but I've never heard of it, I'll often just go to IMDb first because I don't want to just go into a movie only to realize that it's going to be a waste of time. So I'll end up spending a bit of time looking at IMDb first.
Exactly. The trust is so important because you're investing money, you're investing time, you're potentially being very vulnerable, you're giving up personal information, you are trusting people with your life. And so that trust is critical. And knowing how to establish that trust is the key.
Right. Let's get into that because I think most people understand, just the idea of, okay, of course, clients need to trust me and I need to have good credibility in their minds. But not that many consultants really pay a lot of attention to accomplishing that beyond just doing good work. I mean, most people are focused on marketing and delivery of work. But in your book and really the work that you do is focused on helping those executives and companies that you work with to kind of proactively improve in that area. So specifically, how can consultants leave zero doubt about the value that they're delivering and kind of contributing to clients that they're going to be working with so that they can build that personal brand that everyone trusts? What are some of the key steps that consultants can take or should be thinking about to achieve that?
Sure. First of all, it starts with your presence. And by presence, I don't necessarily mean your executive presence, although you can have that online as well. But if I walk into a store and the store looks brick and mortar store and the store looks shabby and the personnel doesn't look well put together and things are missing or things are damaged, I mean, immediately I leave the room, I leave the store because it's like, what's going on here? There's no quality. You can look at all kinds of websites and you see some people are a little bit more savvy about how they present themselves. Others are they may be doing good work, but their websites or their digital footprint doesn't reflect that.
So Harrison, tell me, because I want to get very, very tangible for everyone listening here. Are you referring to the photos of people or their logo or the color, like just how professional the website looks? Give me some specific examples when you say presence.
Absolutely. So everything you just said, there is the structure, the user friendliness, let's say, of a website, right? The way it looks, the first, if it looks cheap or if it's hard to figure out, if it has outdated images, if things are hard to find, if the message on it is not super clear, if the consultant speaks mostly about him or herself, and rather than really sort of telling me what the value is to me, the messaging, the photos, as you just mentioned, just take a professional photo. I mean, you can even see on LinkedIn, some people know how to take a photo, other people don't. They take a snapshot, they were at a party and they thought, hey, this looks pretty good. So they put it up on LinkedIn. So everything, literally everything that people can possibly see, they will pass judgment on, and that will either add to your trustworthiness or it'll sort of detract from it.
Well, I was going to, so I get the website part. Are there other examples that, as you said, kind of the first part is presence beyond the website? What else might presence mean? Like when you think about some of your clients that you counsel on this idea of presence, what are kind of some real world examples of working on that area?
I don't usually work, or I don't necessarily work or coach other consultants. But as far as, again, that trust and how you present yourself, it's the message as well, right? does it sound like you know what you're doing? I had a call with a new client a few days ago, and she called. She is a consultant actually for one of the top consulting firms, and is looking to make it to the director level, highly accomplished, very credentialed, great education, master's and an MBA. And so she tells me a little bit about the culture of the company. And I basically said, listen, I have to be honest with you. If you were my friend, I would say run. Do you really want to work for this kind of company that seems to go against your moral core, against your core values? And she said, no, I totally get what you're saying. And she was chuckling a bit. She said, I do have my plans down the road, but for now, I want to get to that director level. But I appreciate you saying that. And so we spoke a little bit further. I talked about what the process might look like if we work together. And then I said, so listen, think about it and see if that would work for you. And she said, you know what? I'm really big into energy. I believe in energy. And I feel like your energy is very straightforward, direct, and honest. And so I want to work with you. And I said, okay, sounds good. So, we'll get into that next phase of drawing up paperwork and all that stuff. But, I ask people questions like, so what are you hoping to accomplish? I don't do sales calls. I basically just tell people, look, we may or may not be a fit. Tell me what it is that you're looking for, and I'll tell you what I've done in the past, and let's see if that works for you.
So that's really what you're referring to. That's all part of presence.
To me, that is the stuff that creates trust when you are speaking honestly and you are not just trying to get the next gig and trying to give some sort of a sales spiel.
Yeah, very good points. What else? What are some of the kind of key steps that people should really be thinking about in terms of building a personal brand?
You've got to showcase your work. So, a lot of times what you see, for instance, consultants, they have testimonials on their website, right? Which is good. I want to see testimonials, but I don't necessarily want to see Walter M., Minnesota, because you know what? What does that mean? Who is that? Is that your cousin? Now, if it's Walter Mitchell and Walter Mitchell is a VP at Deloitte, well, that has a lot more credibility, So again, what do I need to tell you for you to trust me? So presence is the way I speak, what I say. Do I come across as genuine? Who have I worked with? Right now, a lot of consultants, right? They put on the logos of their clients, and all that's important because that tells a client that, okay, I think it's safe to at least have a conversation because they've worked with all these different people. So let's see if they're a fit, right? And then being just super clear on the value, not just saying, hey, here are all the different things that I can do, but what can you do specifically for me? What should I be expecting? And so you have to be honest and you have to be prepared that the person might say, you know what? So maybe that's not for me. But at least you're not setting yourself and the client up for failure, because I've seen that a lot. I've seen that, a lot of people that have talked to other consultants tell me that it's like, you know what? They're trying to sell me something. It sounds very salesy. I don't really feel doesn't seem very honest. Listen, people can sense it. They may not be able to pinpoint what it is that you said, but they can sense when you're trying to sell them. If you're trying to help them, and obviously it's nice when you're in a position where you don't actually need that particular gig or you need the job, because then you can be selective. You can say, look, are you open to this? Are you going to put in the effort? Who's going to support you in this? And you can have honest conversations then, right? And I think that's what creates that trust. We're talking about trust. I think those are all things that create trust. And the other thing is too, by the way, so once you get into it, listen, my coaching sessions are 60 minutes long, but they've gone into 90 minutes. They've gone into an hour and 20 minutes. I never say, looks like we're at the 60th minute. And so I look forward to speaking to you in a couple of weeks. In fact, one of my clients at one of the big firms that I coach for said, Harrison, how much time do you spend on each coaching engagement? And I said, can't tell you, because there are some consultants that don't think about the client again from the moment they hang up the phone or get off the video until the next time they see them. I think about my clients constantly. In other words, I come across an article, I have a conversation, I jot something down that would be helpful, I have ideas. And so my clients are constantly on my mind. So I might spend hours, many, many more hours than actually engaging with them, actually thinking about them and eventually providing value for them. So all that, because I'm showing them I care, because I do, builds that trust and builds that sort of bond that keeps clients coming back. Because that's the other thing, right? As a consultant, very often you get up in the morning, you have to hunt for a new client. If you can establish a trusting relationship, then firms will come back to you over and over, and because they trust you now, right? You become one of a handful of trusted providers, and they don't have to worry about quality because they see the results. They know that you take care of them.
So I think another thing that's connected to what we're exploring right now is this idea of kind of mastering the art of storytelling, which you talk about in your book. And you lay out three specific types of stories that you say every leader should really master to be able to influence others. And certainly influence, as we're discussing here, is critical for all consultants. So what are the different types of stories that people should really know about, and how can they use them?
Well, so one type of story is certainly the story that you tell people about yourself, because you might get the question, what makes you different? Why should I go with you as opposed to another consultant that's next on the list? And, I tell people, I say, I don't know. I don't know why you should choose me over somebody else. I can tell you what I'm all about. I can tell you my values. I can tell you how I work. I can, based on what you're telling me, I can tell you whether or not we could do this if you're up for it. But I can't tell you really how I'm different from someone else, right? Unless it's very obvious from their website or from what I know, right? They focus on team coaching. I focus on senior management coaching. But other than that, how do you know? So it's the stories you tell about yourself, right? So, and again, listen, if you ask me, Harrison, tell me a story about yourself. Well, I've lived a nice life so far, right? I could tell you a million different stories. But what I need to do is I need to choose the right kind of story or components of story to then make you feel like you can trust me and that you want to go on this journey with me. So the story I tell about myself has to make me credible. It has to make me appear to you that I care, right? And be genuine about it. The story I'm telling you has to show that I know my stuff. So maybe I'll give you some couple of case studies or examples of other clients that had maybe a similar issue. So the story I tell about myself has to be very well thought out and yet completely genuine and in a sense spontaneous. Because if you're asking me, again, I want to be honest and I want to be able to tell you my successes, but how they relate to you, not that they make me look good, right? I tell people that I don't tell these things to make myself feel better. I tell them to make you feel better so you can trust me.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. We had a conversation actually on one of our coaching calls with consultants in our community here. And one of the consultants shared how they use stories as part of their sales conversations, and they prepare for it in advance. So what they do is they think about the different types of objections or challenges or even just common questions that they receive from prospective clients when they're having meetings. And what they then do is they start to attach different experiences or stories that they've had in working with others so that when that question or potential objection appears, they're able to illustrate or to kind of make it more relevant for that client or prospective client based on what they've done with others. While we work with a lot of seasoned and experienced consultants here at Consulting Success, I'm often contacted by new early stage consultants. Invariably, the question I'm asked is, what are the steps I should take to become a successful consultant and grow my consulting business to my first 6 figures per year? Well, I'm excited to announce that we've opened the doors for our Momentum program. This is our most popular program for early stage consultants, and it has helped almost 1,000 consultants to start, run, and grow successful consulting businesses. It gives you the step-by-step plan to help you with your messaging, your fees, and pricing strategies, how to win more proposals, how to go to market more effectively, developing a marketing system to generate leads consistently, and so much more. And right now, until September the 19th, you can sign up for Momentum and get 50% off the regular price by going to consultingsuccess.com/audio. That's consultingsuccess.com/audio, AUDIO. Only 100 spots are available to join Momentum and get 50% off. This deal is only available until September the 19th or until all 100 spots are gone. We won't be opening up new spots in this program for several months, so don't wait. Go to consultingsuccess.com/audio. That's consultingsuccess.com/audio, AUDIO.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I mean, I don't put too many case studies on our website just because I don't think people really want to read through them. Because to me, if you have a bunch of case studies on your website, I mean, none of them are going to be exactly your problem or your issue. And so I'd rather tell people, hey, here's some things that I've helped people with. And then they go, you know what? That's great because that's the level of person that I am. Let's say if it's a VP of finance, then I talk about how I've helped a finance leader with perhaps a similar development opportunity, a similar development area, and that they can relate to that. Now they feel like, you know what, yes, that's exactly the kind of coaching I need, or the help, the support I need. So it's the stories we tell about ourselves to others. It's the stories we tell ourselves, the second one, right? What do I tell myself? Because the stories I tell myself, they will absolutely determine how I act. If I tell myself a story of, look, I need to get as many clients as possible, and here's my strategy, and here's how I'm going to go about it, it just has a different hue. But the story I tell myself is, I want to help people. And so whoever calls, whoever is reaching out, I'm going to listen to them and to see if I could genuinely help them. And if they are in a position to afford the services, right? If they're, whether they're self-funded or whether they are sponsored by their organization, and I can pretty much tell right away if it's the HR leader or if it's the global head of talent management, I know that it's the organization, right? If an executive or someone manager calls me, that's one of the first questions I ask is, are you sponsoring yourself, or is this something that your company? And immediately, I cut my fee in half, because I want to make our services available. I want to help people. And I've even gone so far as to leave 5% of our capacity for startup entrepreneurs or for small business owners, people that maybe run a coffee shop, or they started a little chocolate factory, where they're not the CEO of a Fortune 50 that I may be working with in the morning, but I will have coffee with them on a Saturday afternoon. The payment will be a tiny little percentage of what I typically would charge. Why? Because otherwise they'll never be able to get that kind of support. But I want to help people get unstuck, develop some new behaviors, develop self-awareness, develop strategic self-awareness. That's the story I tell myself. And you know what? When you tell yourself that kind of story, that comes across in how you basically sell yourself.
And what's the third story?
The third story is the story that you tell your company, that you tell your team, that you tell your organization. In other words, it's the values that you want to create in your company. So we have a small team, 8 coaches and a couple of support people. So the story, I tell them exactly that story about how we're here to help people, and we'll do whatever it takes to support someone. We don't just stop on the hour. We check in with people. We offer for people to call us in the middle of the night if they need to email us, to text us. And why? Because, and then again, we talk about how that's helped various people just achieve a completely different level in their career they've never been able to achieve. And so that kind of story creates values in your organization that people then, now the people know what we're all about, right? And they can act accordingly.
Definitely. So your client list includes many well-known brands, as I mentioned early on, as well as others like MetLife and AT&T and Deutsche Bank and Cisco. But what have you found over the years that's been the most effective from a marketing perspective in landing clients? What's kind of your go-to approach, strategy, tactic to win new business and to fill a pipeline of leads and opportunities?
I don't really have a super answer for you on that, because to me, we really don't do much outreach marketing. A lot of it is, people come to us through my books. That's certainly one way, but it's doing really good work, caring about people, being there for them for follow-ups, and then people talk about you to others. Now, the other one, though, that I would say, and that's one that anyone can do, is increase your digital footprint. Write articles, try to get published by, whether it's thriveglobal.com or hr.com or one of the Entrepreneur or Inc. or HBR. Obviously, some of these are tougher to get into than others, but people don't see your name and then some valuable stuff, advice connected to your name, they won't really know you, and they won't really, that's tough for them to find you. So put yourself out there, post on LinkedIn, comment on other people's posts, support people. It's not just about self-promotion. It's also about lifting others up. And when people see some of your stuff like that, then you're going to get some attention.
And Harrison, what about in the early days? So before your brand was really well established as it is today, how did you go about kind of getting your first few clients and just attracting new business?
And so before I had all this, this sort of firepower behind me, books and big clients to then attract other clients with, it was having just conversations. There's no other way. You have to have conversations where people ask, what do you do? Well, at the time, I wasn't even quite sure if I should call myself an executive coach, because nobody knew what an executive coach was, or what does that mean? And so basically, I had to very succinctly tell people, I help people be more successful with their employees, with their teams, so that their teams are engaged and want to come to work and do great work and are really super productive. Well, if you tell the right person that, they're like, you know what? I mean, I know nothing about you, but if you can do that, then I'd like to have a conversation. And then, of course, right?
And how did you create even the opportunity to have those conversations, right? So once you're in front of an ideal client, right, you can tell them what you do. You can have that meaningful conversation, but getting to that point, a lot of people struggle with that. So what were you doing to actually find yourself in that place where you could have that conversation? You know, were you sending letters? Were you making phone calls? Were you attending events? Were you getting referrals? What kind of take us back to the early days of Harrison? What did that look like?
Yes. So I would reach out to people. This was before Google even existed, right? So if I met someone and I would attend events, I would be in a coffee shop, I would strike up a conversation in a coffee shop and see somebody reading a newspaper or an article. I'm like, this is an interesting article, isn't it? And so I was not shy, even though I'm an introvert, and I may be a little shy and more reserved because I'm originally from Germany and that's a little bit more our style. But I knew that I had to adapt to the situation. If I just gave in to my natural tendencies, I'd be locking myself in a room and just read a book. So I knew I needed to get out there. So you have to have conversations, find venues, talk to people. You might be speaking to 500 people before somebody says, that sounds interesting. I think I know someone you should be speaking to. Nowadays, of course, people have all kinds of venues. Again, putting yourself out there, write an article, write a post, call somebody, send somebody a copy of an article that you read that you think they might be interested in. So you have to build your network. You have to nurture that network little by little. Just become visible. Let people know you exist and what you do. And that I found more often than not leading to success because you're out there, you're talking, and somebody will say, wow, can you help me with this? Right. And then you have to specialize sort of. And you don't have to specialize, but then it's like, do you help small business owners? What are your fees? Who can afford you? Who do you like to work with? What kind of work do you do? So, and then really kind of specializing a little bit in those areas. Like over the years, it just sort of happened that I started specializing in the more senior level management from the director level up to the CEO level. And that works for me.
Right. So you've touched on fees and pricing here a couple of times. Tell us more about kind of what your approach is to that specifically, to your fees, to your pricing. How does it work kind of with your business model? Just what kind of structure do you typically use when you're working with clients when it comes to pricing and fees?
So typically our engagements are 6 months. So that's the standard, of course, executive coaching engagement. We also offer shorter engagements of 3 months. Sometimes they are, longer. People extend to 9 or 12 months.
Is it on an hourly basis?
It's not hourly.
Okay. So is it package like for the 6 months or 3 months, or is it done monthly, or how do most people kind of?
Yeah. I mean, there are exceptions where a company says, look, we really don't pay by the project or by the engagement. We'd like to pay monthly. And so, yeah, I make those exceptions. But for the most part, it is for the entire engagement. And then we, most of the time, 90% of the time, we bill at the end of the engagement. I mean, if it's a big firm, it's a Fortune 50, Fortune 500 firm. We bill at the end of the engagement.
So you won't take any kind of payment or deposit up front in many instances?
Correct.
Okay. And then you get payments. So let's just say if it's a 6-month engagement, how soon after the 6-month engagement finishes do you actually receive the money in your bank?
So it could be anywhere from 45 to 120 days, depending on how, often the bigger the company, the longer it takes. But these are companies you can trust. And obviously you have to have work in the pipeline so that you can afford to do that. But it's one of the things that we've been doing for a long time. It works. Sometimes, listen, if it's an individual, self-funded, then we take half up front. And then let's say if it's a 6-month engagement, we take half up front. And then the second half is then being built at the beginning of the second part of the engagement.
Right. So, and then, you mentioned you have now several other team members. How do you work with them in terms of your pricing? Like, you have your fee for the project, and then is it kind of built in what kind of the hourly rate that your team members want to receive and that you're paying them, and your margin as the owner is on top of that? Or just kind of walk us through for those consultants who are looking to either build a team or have a small team and they're wondering about compensation kind of plans and structure. What have you found works best?
I found what works best for me, and that is to pay my consultants that work for me on an hourly basis. And then I build a client, of course, a project, but they're not, depending on the background, if you if you're a PhD and a long background in psychology, or we have a couple of neuroscientists, that are not on our website. It just depends. I mean, people they come to you with different needs, and we try to make people happy. But at the same time, you also have to make some money. So, I always tell people, like, listen, I mean, I've had a couple of people, actually a long time ago, somebody saying, oh, that's, wow, the company's making a lot more money. I'm like, well, it takes a lot more to get the client. The coaching is the fun part. I wish I could do just the fun part and do the coaching, but it's the marketing, it's the getting the client that is hard. There are many, many conversations sometimes. There are hours and hours of conversations and paperwork and contracting that takes place before you ever have that very first coaching session. And so, believe me, actually, Michael, over the years, I've gotten so many applications from, people with PhDs or master's degrees that, hey, I'm interested in joining your coaching firm as a consultant. I usually ask back, I said, so what are you envisioning? So do you just join us and then we'll give you clients and you can just go ahead and do the coaching? And then the answer, they think they're bringing their skill, and they're just hoping for a nice little home where they get paid for the thing they love to do. And I'm like, unfortunately, it's not that easy.
And then, Harrison, how do you decide when to pass a project or a piece of business to one of your coaches and consultants compared to or versus you doing the work yourself? Like, when do you decide, okay, I'm going to work with that client directly? And when do you then kind of delegate that project to your team members?
That's a good question. And there are typically three ways in which would determine. One is if the client asks for a female coach, then that's an easy one. Then we have fantastic, female coaches. So sometimes when people ask for male coaches or female coaches, so that can happen, and then that's great. Another is the background of the person. If, for instance, the coach has an emphasis in terms of their background on the consumer industries or medical or finance, then that also, a coach doesn't have to be an expert in the client's industry or client's business, but sometimes it helps with context, so that could be one. And just maybe personality fit. Some coaches are a little bit more entrepreneurial, and that can certainly determine it. And then very often when it's a big firm, when it's one of the Fortune 50 or Fortune 500, I would typically start out a coaching engagement, so with the first couple of leaders, and then establish that relationship. And then if the company brings more and says, this is great, we have some other executives or leaders that we'd like to have coached by your firm, then we potentially introduce others, because of course I can't do it all myself, but they're all highly qualified, and interpersonal relationship is super important to me. And then people walk away and they fall in love with the coaches. They're basically like, God, I love John, and he's the most, God, I won't forget him, and this is the kind of, so whether they work with me or one of my other coaches, I want them to have these relationships and never forget us. Just because, it's like you never forget an amazing professor or an amazing teacher you've had, right? I remember my first grade teacher is because of the way she was and the way she explained things to me. I don't know how to draw straight lines, I guess. I don't know.
Well, Harrison, I want to thank you very much for coming on and sharing here with us a bit of your journey and best practices that you've gathered along the way. Where's the best place for people to learn more about your books and your work?
Yeah, so the book is on Amazon and BarnesandNoble.com now. So Amazon.com is great. Executive Presence, the second edition. The subtitle is The Art of Commanding Respect Like a CEO. And then our website is GuruMaker.com. So the company is GuruMaker Executive Development. The website is GuruMaker.com, and very accessible. So if anybody has any questions, if I can give some advice, again, I'd be very happy to help.
Wonderful. Well, Harrison, thanks again for coming on.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. For more episodes and to subscribe, rate, and leave a review, head on over to iTunes. And if you'd like to develop consistent lead flow and a highly profitable consulting business, learn more about our coaching programs at consultingsuccess.com.